Hi, everyone. We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
And we are two social scientists with PhDs in essentially how systems work within the world, which is big and broad and we know a little bit wild. But we think it's really, really important, which is why we spend all of our time empathy educating, say that 14 times fast, and encouraging folks to have conversations both with themselves and with culture and with people around them about how understanding difference makes us richer in our lives. We do that here on our channels, wherever you are encountering us, with a variety of conversations. You can find us talking about everything from our feelings on Taylor Swift's latest album, to the manifestations of systemic racism within Bridgerton, to capital punishment in The Handmaid's Tale, to my latest journey in finding makeup and how, for the upcoming TED Talk I'm about to give. We cover it all.
This particular video is a part of our ongoing series where we look at aspects of popular culture that can be streaming available anywhere. And so we have a streaming content playlist, but within this, we are specifically focused at this point in time on looking at some of the offerings for awards seasons in the year of our Lord 2021. And some key nominations that would fall under the category of diverse representation, or helping us to understand and empathize from a perspective of inclusivity. So we've talked about Crip Camp, which is a nominated documentary. We've talked about Minari, which we will evangelize about for the rest of time. Mm-hmm. And today's offering, we are talking about the 2021 film, The United States versus Billie Holiday, directed by Lee Daniels of The Butler fame, starring Andra Day, the musician, in her first feature acting debut, and girl, did she come for it. It is available on Hulu for a streaming service, and it is specifically, it's not a biography of Billie Holiday. It's a biography around a specific part of Billie Holiday's life, which is her interaction with the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the United States of America, and how that intersected with her addiction to the substance of heroin. And Dr. Donnelly has done a lot of research about this, and she'll get into her intersections with drug addiction and what she learned. But we know that this is more based on the book Chasing the Scream and the information that exists in it. It is not a straight up biography of Billie Holiday. For that, you need Lady Sings the Blues, which is both a book and a film starring Diana Ross, which she was nominated for and won, I believe.
I don't know I can't remember if she won for it, to be quite frank. I know she was nominated.
She was nominated for an Academy Award for it, as is Andra Day. So that is what we are talking about today. We've got some thoughts and feelings about this exceptional film. But first, Dr. Kristen, what would you like to share?
There's a lot to cover in this movie, and we can spend a lot of time doing it. The main crux of the fight between the U.S. government, which I'm not even sure it was the FBI at this time, because I don't think the FBI existed.
Oh, that's right. It was narcotics.
It's narcotics, which is under the Treasury Department.
You're correct. Yeah.
And it grew out of the what was the prohibition fight.
Yeah.
So you've got a whole bunch of really kind of untrained and angry and mafia adjacent folks. And Harry Aslinger has been brought in entirely because he's married into the Mellon family. And at the time, the Mellon family was also the head of the Mellon. I think it was Andrew Mellon at that point, was the Secretary of the Treasury.
Yeah.
So a little bit of nepotism.
Big Western Pennsylvania energy.
Yeah, and also Northern Irish energy, because the Mellon family is from Oma, where my family is from.
Hey,
so some big Ulster energy also coming at you. And Henry Aslinger was one of those guys who was a dude of his time.
For sure.
In like every way you possibly can be. I would deeply recommend Johann Hari's Chasing the Scream. It's one of the most engaging history books I've ever read in understanding the origins of even the phrase "the war on drugs." Our man Harry's the first one to use it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of racial stuff around it, which we're going to get into, but the crux of this fight, I mean, is not just Billie Holiday's heroin use, but her complete insistence on singing the song Strange Fruit.
Mm-hmm.
If you've never heard the song Strange Fruit, good news, we're about to play it for you. We're going to play you a clip of Andra performing it in the movie, actually. But the song Strange Fruit is often given credit as the beginning of the civil rights movement in the United States, actually. That this was, at the time, all jazz music was about love. This is not about love. In any way, shape, or form.
Nope.
And so she was a revolutionary entity within the world, and her life is tragic in the way that so many revolutionary lives are. We'll get into all of that, but in order to really set the stage for understanding why the U.S. government, because honestly, if she hadn't been singing this song, I'm not entirely sure she would have been the poster child for their fight on the war on drugs.
Like, no, they wouldn't have cared.
I just don't think they would have cared.
No.
Like, there might be an argument somewhere that, like, she was the most famous Black lady at the time, and so maybe they still would have gone after her. Possibly. I'll give you a possible on that. But it's this song. It is this song.
And the movie, like, really, really brings that out, that under the guise of this war on drugs, and he did, I think he believed some of the crazy stuff that he believed.
Oh no, I think he 100% bought into his own propaganda.
But the movie also makes it very clear that the problem that they had with Billie Holiday was that she was singing this song, and that this song showed a side of American history and the American government and American society's complicitness in the violence of lynching and complicitness in the oppression and violence against Black bodies. And so, like, that was 100% what they just used the fact that she was also addicted to heroin to criminalize her. But yeah, let's start with Strange Fruit and we'll go from there.
We'll start with Strange Fruit, and we'll see you guys in a couple seconds.
Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain together, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the trees to drop. Here is a strange and bitter. crowd.
So yeah.
Like goosebumps, absolute, like head to toe goosebumps.
Andra Day can sing. I don't know if anyone knew that. She can sing a little bit.
Just a little bit.
I hope you, if you've never seen it before, never encountered that song before, I hope you can understand a little bit, just even mentally take your place at how powerful that would have been for people to hear both. And we have lots of evidence, by the way, despite the government's like deep need to silence it, that there were quite a lot of white people who wanted her to sing that song, because there were quite a lot of white people that wanted lynchings to end too. Like this wasn't going out into the void and being ignored. The reason the government needed to shut it down was that it was massively popular.
People requested it, and like they show you that in the film. Like somebody, like a white woman, stood up and sang and was like, "Sing Strange Fruit." Like
she said, "Sorry, not tonight, honey."
Yeah. So I think that's an important, like, there's a difference, we talk about this a lot, between the government and the people and what the government was trying to do and what the people wanted. And there was a lot of white complicitness, certainly, in that state project, but it was a very popular song. And
there was some also some black implicitness. We addressed that in the movie, because one of the particular things about Harry is that he realized that where the drugs were, white people couldn't go, and so he hired black agents and sent them into Harlem and sent them into Baltimore. So before we get on to that thing, if anyone hasn't seen the film, just real quick rundown. You may have heard that Billie Holiday was a very famous jazz singer, and she was one of the, I think, like, honestly, the female jazz mother. Like, they called her Lady Day, and like there's nobody really before her.
Because she predated Rosemary Clooney, right?
She very much predated Rosemary Clooney. She was a contemporary with Louis Armstrong, and also there were lots and lots of, like, jazz was scary to most United States government officials because it was everything they hated. It was there were no rules. It could go on forever. It was participatory. It was done in CD clubs. It was against this idea of order that the United States government was trying so hard to make Americans disciplined and orderly, because after World War I, the entire world said, "Holy crap, everything is terrible."
Yeah, and
we don't know how to respond.
Yeah, and especially Black Americans.
So that's it. Like, we follow her in this very specific time of her life, which was very brief because she died very young, in which she, the Harry Aslinger, played by Garrett Helmond. I can't. Yeah. Love it. Thank you for taking this role. Enters her life through a black federal agent.
Yeah. Jimmy Fletcher.
Who falls in love with her and is his greatest regret in life is turning her in at one point. And so a big part of the movie is his journey towards being the only person in her life that saw her as a human being. Mm-hmm. So we meet a guy named Louis McKay in the movie, who is very much presented as her husband. And at some point she potentially chose him. I want to be very clear that historically he was her pimp at first. When she was first sold into sexual slavery, he was her pimp, and he then married her to make it legitimate. She began being sold for her body in her young teenage years. And so that's been her relationship with him in real life throughout her whole life. And if you understand that, some of the choices in the movie that she makes perhaps make a slight bit more sense. I wish they would have teased that out a little bit more. I can now transition into my rant about the history of the war on drugs. But before I do that, I want to cede the floor to yourself and say anything else about the movie itself.
The movie itself. Yeah. So I was thinking about it. I rewatched some clips of it last night just so that this was fresh in my mind. And it's not the first time we've seen stories about what it was like, especially in the South, and as she's on this tour of the South, and this period of lynching. It's not the first time I've seen a lynching on film, but it was the most powerful and emotional and impactful. And what this movie does so brilliantly is situate you within her perspective of all the complexities of who she was as a person, all her identities and intersections of being a Black woman, of growing up with a mother who was a sex worker, of being criminalized and incarcerated and sexually assaulted from the age of 10, but also being a heroin addict and what that meant. And that's the value, I think, in this, more so in the movie, which is clunky at times. The value is in Andra Day and what she's able to embody.
Yeah, the movie is not brilliantly made as a piece of art.
It's not great on the same level that her performance is transcendent.
No, she outshines the film.
And I think you can even see that in that clip, even without watching it. And in the movie, you know that a lot of times she needed to be high to perform, but especially to be able to perform that song. And you can see it in her face. You can see like the kind of spaced out,
the disassociation she had to do to engage with that song.
The disconnection that she had to remove her humanity to sing that song. So I think for me, that's the real value in it, and why deservedly she's getting so many nominations and wins.
Yep.
The scene with the lynching is exceptionally powerful and needed to be in the film. I'm really glad they included it. And I think I'll transition you. I'll lob a softball at you for the conversation about addiction, because I think it's so important that to understand how particularly Black communities were criminalized with this war on drugs started by Harry Anslinger. And we get the hint of that in this movie, but they don't really explore it outside of several conversations. And, you know, Jimmy Fletcher, who's the agent, said something about, like, I know what drugs are doing to our communities. Like, I know what they're doing. But then her friends push back and say, but yeah, who's doing it? The drugs, like, who's giving us the drugs? Who's criminalizing it? Who's making it happen in our communities? We have to hold people accountable. And there's a great line where she's being interviewed by a white reporter who looks at her and says, "It's a war on drugs, honey, not on you." And Billie just looks at him and says, well, that's what they want you to believe. And for me, I think that encapsulates the perspective they were trying to show in the U.S. government's relationship and in the war on drugs, and how it was portrayed to popular media enough that this person believed that it's a war on drugs. It's not a war on Black people. No, it's about the drugs. And I think that's what you need to know to then understand all of the excellent analysis Dr. Kristen is now going to give you. So I've set you up. Take it away.
Couple quick things. The conversation about decriminalization and legalization of various drugs is complicated and long and carries a lot of nuances that we are just going to park on a shelf real quick. I am in the middle of doing a lot of research on it, and we might be able to bring you content about it in the future as we record this. Patrick O'Keefe. I keep calling him Patrick O'Keefe.
I know, I want to too, but it's not. It's Patrick Raddenkeefe.
Patrick Raddenkeefe's book on the Sackler family, who are some of history's greatest monsters, has just released. They are the family that created OxyContin, by the way. And any conversation about the legalization of drugs needs an asterisk for where it comes to OxyContin and where it comes specifically to medically dictated opiates. But we're going to engage in that conversation a little bit more in this channel. So we're not getting into that. So here's a couple facts, though. When Billie Holiday was born, all of these drugs that are criminalized currently were legal. You got them at the pharmacy. Mm-hmm. There was absolutely cocaine in the original Coke formula. There was cocaine in most cough syrups that you got. It was very common and very, very easily accessible. The addiction rate was around the same rate as alcohol addiction rate, proportionately to populations. And for a host of reasons, largely, I think, because as we're coming out of Prohibition, we learned all the wrong lessons from Prohibition, and the United States has a great history of learning all the wrong lessons. It's one of our great
It's a
great
sport.
American pastimes.
It
So
is our
we
national
learned
pastime. More than
baseball,
baseball.
apple pie, learning the wrong lessons.
Learning the wrong lessons. Yes, it is.
We
a
definitely learned the wrong lessons from Prohibition. And so we thought like, oh, well, the real issue with Prohibition was that, the real reason it didn't work was like the mafia or whatever. And that's not the case. Telling an entire population of people, morally controlling an entire population of people has actually in the history of life never worked. And it's never going to work, but we've been trying it for, I don't know, a couple millennia to zero success. I love humans. So we learned all the wrong lessons from Prohibition, and we were like, you know what? We still need to control something. This was not conscious, obviously. These were all subconscious, culturally conditioned things. This is all happening in the midst of two very major social changes. We already mentioned World War I. I want to go back to that really quick.
Mm-hmm.
The turn of the century in Western Europe and the United States was like this boon of positivity. We had the Industrial Revolution. We haven't really thought about child labor. We haven't thought about 40-hour work weeks. We haven't thought about any of the downsides yet to the Industrial Revolution. All we have thought about before we hit World War I is progress. Everything is going to get better. Everything is going to be like, look at this untapped potential humanity has. Then we realized that you can kill people with mustard gas, and a whole lot of people with mustard gas. And we had massive, massive stalemates in Europe over World War I. And people began to realize, globally even, but mostly in the West, like, oh, humans have unlimited potential for greatness and unlimited potential for evil.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And so there became a like semi-global panic over having control. And we had like a renaissance of Victorian morality. And that's where you get Prohibition. That's where you get eventually this war on drugs. But of course, we had to dress it up a little bit differently, because the other thing that you have at this point is a deep and unrelenting fear by white people of Black men in particular, fed by the movie Birth of a Nation.
Yeah. And around this, like, so much of what happens uniquely in America pre and post First World War is a reaction to Reconstruction and the failed project of Reconstruction, and the pendulum swing towards reacting against the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments as well. And so it's no coincidence that Birth of a Nation is released and popular at the same time we're passing sweeping Jim Crow laws in the South to disenfranchise Black folks. So I think, like, it's so interesting to me to look at the global context of something like that, but then uniquely American stuff too. But Birth of a Nation is responsible for creating and solidifying within the American psyche this idea of a criminalized Black man and a violent Black man, especially as a threat to women.
Yeah.
And I think Dr. Kristen can really unpack the religious reasons behind this and the gender reasons behind this. But it was an exceptionally effective propaganda tool that really tees up the work of the war on drugs.
I want to read directly from Chasing the Scream here. This is all in chapter 1. I'm jumping around mostly page 26 and 27 if you end up getting it and you want to do. So the main reason given for banning drugs, the reason obsessing the men who launched this war, was that Blacks, Mexicans, and Chinese were using these chemicals, forgetting their place and menacing white people. Harry told the public that, quote, the increase in drug addiction is practically 100% among Negro people, which he stressed was terrifying because already the Negro population accounts for 10% of the total population, but 60% of the addicts. I want to just right now let you know that those numbers are made up 100% on the spot.
Lies.
He didn't have that kind of data. We weren't collecting that kind of data. This is the really important point. He could wage the drug war. He could do what he did only because he was responding to a fear in the American people. You can be a great surfer, but you still need a great wave. And Harry's wave came in the form of race panic.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, cocaine, it was widely claimed in the press at the time, was turning Blacks into superhuman hulks who could take bullets to the heart without flinching. It was the official reason given why the police across the South increased the caliber of their guns. So evidently, like, Hydra's out here turning the super soldier serum all over. Like, we didn't need Steve Rogers. We already had.
No, and they had already, like, before they enacted their plan in Eastern Europe, they apparently came to the United States and enacted it in the rural South.
I mean, it's just good to know we had a role.
I mean, I would like to know where those secret Marvel comics are hidden.
Yeah.
Where they trace that rabbit hole.
Fandom has some questions. So next quote, many white Americans did not want to accept that Black Americans might be rebelling because they had lives like Billie Holiday's, locked into pig towns and banned from developing their talents. It was more comforting to believe that a white powder was the cause of Black anger than get rid of the white powder, and that getting rid of the white powder would render Black Americans docile and on their knees once again.
Mm.
Then there is also, I want to just be very clear too, he didn't just hate Black people. The connection with cocaine and heroin in particular was largely driven in his racism against Chinese people and their relationship with opiates to begin with. Right. So last quote, I promise. In the mid-19th century, Chinese immigrants had begun to flow into the United States and were now competing with white people for jobs and opportunities. For more on that, please head to our coverage on the documentary Asian Americans.
Yes.
Worse still, Harry believed they were competing for white women. He warned that with their, quote, special own Oriental ruthlessness, end quote, the Chinese had developed a, quote, liking for the charms of Caucasian girls from good families who they lured into opium dens. And this is now an end quote, got the girls hooked and then forced them into acts of unspeakable sexual depravity for the rest of their lives. This is the early narrative of a drug dealer, which is also, like, this is one of the problems about narratives and stereotypes. It's never that it's not 100% true.
Yeah.
Like, it's just never the full story.
It's never the full story.
So were there Chinese men doing this? Oh, probably, because there are evil humans in everywhere. Are there drug dealers that do this kind of thing now? Totes, because it works. But this was never the full story. So we need to understand Harry Anslinger was the very first man to use the phrase war on drugs. It wasn't Nixon. It wasn't Reagan. It wasn't that. We're 100 years into this thing. And it was absolutely fueled by a panic. They're also very clearly in the book, and I've read this in multiple other locations as well. Harry Anslinger would say things in the press like, well, marijuana turns Black men into feral beasts, direct quote. And a bunch of doctors would write to him and be like, it actually doesn't.
Yeah. Harry. Stop saying this in front of microphones. And Harry's like, oh no, I'm sorry. I'm in front of a microphone.
I'm in front of a microphone and I'm really sorry. Oh, what happened? You just lost your medical license. And he just got rid of everybody who disagreed with him. He discredited everybody who disagreed with him. So if you would like scientific studies about what marijuana actually does to people's brains, they're very difficult to find because he burned most of them from the early bits, from what I've read. Early bits of the 20th century. All of his papers, by the way, because he was born in Altoona, Pennsylvania, all of his papers are Penn State. And so this author, Johann Hari, went to Penn State and went through all of his archives and read everything in Harry's own hand. And Harry was very clear about how he felt about things. As you can tell from multiple brief quotes, Harry was not a retiring or shy man regarding his moral outrage. But the movie paints him, and American history has painted him as a hero. He gets a Medal of Freedom from John F. Kennedy before he retires. He, by all accounts, believed so strongly in this fight that it did affect his body. He went bald from stress. He 100% bought his own Kool-Aid. This was not a cult leader who doesn't believe what he's saying. He just wants power. Harry Anslinger 100% was a racist who believed that he was a racist right supremacist. That's what he was, with a badge. Yeah. And Billie Holiday was collateral damage. Billie died, by the way, handcuffed to her hospital bed. They actually had cops at her funeral because they were so afraid that a race riot would break out. Her life was always other people's. Mm-hmm. And it was never hers. This is a little bit longer of a video than some of our other analyses on movies. We hope you are okay with that, because this one had a lot to say. And I wanted to spend more time with the context of the drug war so that you can understand that Billie never had agency in her life.
Yeah.
Ever. She was, when she was 10 years old, she was sexually assaulted, and she was jailed for essentially like leading the guy on.
For the audacity to be raped? I don't understand.
At 10 years old?
Yeah.
And then she comes back from jail and tries to move in with her mom, but there's no room in the whorehouse where her mother lives. That was what it was called. I'm not being derivative. Where her mother was a sex worker. And so she gets kicked out and goes somewhere else. And that's where we meet Louis McKay. And she was like she was being pimped from 14.
Yeah. And I think what's so important about this too is like the hypersexualization of Black women.
Yes.
In this. And the fact that I love that not only was a person lynched in this movie, I don't love it, but I love that they showed it, but it was a Black woman.
Yes, I noticed that as well, that was very clear. And the note on her body, poorly spelled, said justice served. Justice served.
Yeah. So, we talked about, and Dr. Kristen unpacked brilliantly the criminalization and the fear of Black male violence against white women. But there was also this hypersexualization of Black women.
Yes, which still exists.
Still exists. I mean, we've all seen, well, not all of us, but a lot of us have remembered the scene in 12 Years a Slave, and this idea that Black women were tempting white men and, bringing them into moral fault, whatever the reasons. That is also an aspect of this. And the hypersexualization of Billie Holiday as a person, to lose her agency at such a young age, especially over issues like consent, is another. I mean, there's so much in this movie. It's a shame we didn't have anything to say about it.
We chose to focus on the drug thing specifically because we've been talking for a long time about how we've actually had a heroin epidemic in this country for decades, centuries. It's been a lot. We didn't start caring about it on a national level until it started leaving Black and brown communities and going into white communities. Predominantly, that has been a particular soapbox of ours for a little while now. And so we wanted to take this opportunity to bring up a foundational reason as to why that is, which this movie also gave us a chance to do. We can talk for a long time about her sexual agency. I loved that we saw several men have sex with her. We only saw her enjoy it once. And that was very clearly and intentionally shot. I do think that there's chunks of this movie that are a mess, that I don't really understand what was going on. But at no point in time could I take my eyes off of Andra Day if she was on the screen. It is morally messy because her life is morally messy. She is going to, her life goes contrary to a lot of the narratives that we've been taught. Her life is a huge part of the unlearning of the national narrative of the early 20th century in the United States. And I think it is, to me, this movie would be mandatory viewing, except that I respect that it's not a great film. So, yeah.
But I think, and that was the other thing you just brought up that I wanted to make sure that I said out loud, too. In our Colonizers World Tour series, we're talking about all the things we didn't know when we start looking at a particular country. And I went through, kind of 1950s, 60s, 40s music phase. Both Dr. Kristen and I did. But I was obsessed with Frank Sinatra and Bobby Darin and Rosemary Clooney and Billie Holiday. And I had a Billie Holiday greatest hits CD. And Strange Fruit wasn't on it, kids. And I think bringing up the unlearning we have to do, we even have to unlearn the story we thought we knew about Billie Holiday. And who she was as a person, because a lot of that has been written out of the way we celebrate her music. And this greatest hits album only had the love songs on it.
When truly her greatest hit was Strange Fruit.
Yeah. So I think, the movie does a lot just to dispel that myth and to say be careful about the stories you're told and who's telling them and why they're telling them, and ask questions.
Yep. Absolutely. Be careful about the stories that you're being told and investigate them. There's lots of things that folks have asked us to cover that we are not going to, for example, because we've heard that the storyteller is not trustworthy. And so that is something to always consider. Whether a lot of historical documents back up that this storyteller was trustworthy and that this is, in fact, her diaries say a lot of this kind of stuff. And in one of the passages, it even seems like she wasn't even really that mad at Harry because he was like caught up in a machine. That like she was smarter than everybody else around her. She was just never given the chance to exercise that in a way. But anyway, we're gonna jump from the early 20th century to the early 21st century in our next week's coverage, but it's going to be just as complicated of a narrative. And it's going to involve a whole lot of poking at society in the same way that this one does and unlearning in another specific way. We're talking next week about Emerald Fennell's masterpiece. I'm just going to call it Promising Young Woman, which stars among a whole lot of other people we love, Carey Mulligan. And we hope that you join us for that. In the meantime, if you liked this video, please hit the thumbs up button. It helps the algorithm so much. If you don't want to miss any of our content, subscribe to this channel. If you like our analysis and would like to hear it about books, good news for you, we have an entire channel about books that is creatively called Abby Research Reads. We'd love to have you join us over there for continual coverage of books about inclusivity and equity and how we engage with stories, especially in first-person narratives and memoirs, how we engage with those stories. Because as much as we love watching things, books come out faster. So there are more stories to consume. And we're trying our best to bring as many of them to you as possible.
Yeah, especially during the COVID. We're getting a COVID delay with visual art being produced, but people can write from home. So
it's been great. And there's like entire genres we didn't tap into when we were in our PhDs that I'm like, oh, this came out in 2012. Fascinating.
Oh, I know. We're doing a second decade renaissance.
So we'll see you next week or before that for any of the other videos on our channel. And we hope until we see you again, you have a fantastic day.
Take care, everybody.